All right, if you're an economics student, I know for a fact you've spent hours, probably way too many hours, staring at balance sheets. But today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a mechanical reality of global sovereign finance that honestly might just blow your mind. Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving deep into the architecture of modern money. And specifically, we're going to look at exactly how debt became the ultimate asset. Let's start right here. $315 trillion. I mean, it is just a staggering number to even try to wrap your head around. To put it into perspective, that's nearly 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Every single country, every bank, every citizen, we're all tangled up in this massive, intricate web of liabilities. Which actually brings us to a really fascinating paradox. Think about it. If everybody on Earth owes money, who exactly is owed? Well, if you follow the chain of creditors long enough, you start to realize something crazy. The world doesn't actually owe this money to anyone in particular. It owes it to itself. So here's our roadmap for deconstructing all of this today. We'll hit the global debt paradox, the birth of the bond, how debt becomes money, treasuries as global collateral, the refinancing machine, and finally, inequality and systemic risk. Let's get into it. Part 1. The global debt paradox. Who really holds the debt? Okay, so when people talk about the $38 trillion US national debt, the common assumption, the one you hear all the time, is that America is just deeply, deeply in debt to China. But the reality is completely different. Look at this breakdown. China holds only about 2% of the total. Meanwhile, a massive 66% is held by US domestic entities. We're talking American banks, pension funds, mutual funds, and of course, the Federal Reserve. The vast majority of the debt America owes is literally to itself. It's pretty wild when you actually map it out like this. Moving on to part 2, the birth of the bond, born in war, not Wall Street. So let's rewind a bit. The year is 1694. England is fighting France. And, well, they're rapidly running out of gold. So what does the king do? He turns to merchants to finance the crown, basically offering them a permanent stream of interest payments backed by future taxes. The Bank of England gets created to manage this whole arrangement, and just like that, boom, the tradable government bond is born. The battlefield was literally turned into a balance sheet. It gave the state this incredible, revolutionary ability to spend money it didn't even have yet. Part 3, how debt becomes money, the core mechanism. Now, as economic students, this is the crucial mechanical loop you need to understand, how debt literally acts as money. First, the Treasury issues bonds. Second, banks and funds buy them up. Third, central banks step in to buy them back, and in doing so, they literally create new dollars out of thin air. And finally, citizens pay taxes that fund the interest, which then flows right back into their own retirement accounts. The liability of one balance sheet literally becomes the asset of another. It's like this elegant, almost unbelievable perpetual motion machine. And this leads to a massive realization. There is absolutely no such thing as debt-free money. Every single digital dollar has an invisible IOU attached to it. Central banks don't just manage debt, guys, they manufacture it. They ensure that every single dollar sitting in your bank account represents a unit of debt somewhere else in the system. Part 4. Treasuries as global collateral, the planetary hot potato. This circularity we're talking about, it isn't just an American phenomenon. It is basically a planetary game of hot potato. Check this out. Japan lends to the US by buying treasuries. Then, the US lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And those developing nations, they lend right back by parking their reserves in Western bonds. It's like a massive global poker table, and literally everyone is playing with chips they borrowed from the person sitting next to them. Part 5. The refinancing machine. Refinancing forever. Now we really have to shift our paradigm here, because governments today don't actually plan to pay off their debt. Not now, not ever. When you or I take on household debt, we expect to repay the principal, right? But sovereign debt, that's more like a rolling subscription. Governments just issue new bonds to pay off the old ones. They're refinancing forever. In this system, the interest is the real product. It's essentially the rent charged for global economic stability. And here is the kicker. Paying off this debt would actually be catastrophic. Seriously, think about it. If the US somehow magically paid down its entire $38 trillion debt today, banks worldwide would instantly lose their safest, most stable asset. Because, as we established, debt acts as money, the global dollar supply would shrink drastically. We're talking severe deflation and total economic collapse. Paradoxically, the system absolutely needs the debt just to survive. Part 6, Inequality and Systemic Risk When Confidence Breaks. All right, here is a rather hard truth about this architecture. Debt is a transfer between classes. When people say we owe it to ourselves, well, that's really only half true. Interest payments flow upward from taxpayers and workers, directly into the pockets of the institutions and investors who are holding the debt. This system inherently rewards those who own it and punishes those who merely pay it. But what happens when confidence wavers? When the engine just runs out of fuel? The reality is brutal. Look at Greece in 2010. Unpayable debt led to strict austerity and mass unemployment. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned their debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, currency shortages caused total political collapse. When the system breaks down, those anonymous creditors suddenly step out of the shadows, and they hold entire nations by the throat. Democracy decides who governs. Markets decide who survives. That quote really hits the nail on the head. Behind every government bond sits a web of immensely powerful institutions, hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, central banks. They arbitrate global survival. They are the ones deciding which nations can borrow cheaply and which ones are going to pay a heavy premium just to stay afloat. So let's wrap this up. Debt at its very core is just a promise. So the ultimate question we have to ask ourselves is, what happens when the engine runs out of fuel and that promise can no longer be kept? This entire financial architecture is a closed loop of trust, built entirely on rolling IOUs. As you continue your studies in economics, I want you to look past the mechanics and consider the incredible fragility of the confidence that's holding it all together. Keep questioning the architecture around you. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.